The WNBA believed it was finally entering a long-awaited golden era. Attendance was surging, ratings were climbing, and national attention followed. At the center of that sudden explosion stood one unmistakable name. Caitlin Clark didn't just attract fans, she reshaped the entire conversation. Every arena felt different the moment she stepped onto the court. Cameras followed her, headlines chased her, and ticket prices soared. For the league, this was supposed to be the dream scenario. Years of slow growth suddenly compressed into a single season. But behind the celebration, something far more tense was unfolding. Because success arrived faster than the system was built to handle. And Caitlin Clark unintentionally exposed that weakness. Her popularity forced uncomfortable questions into the open. Questions the league had avoided for years. Who controls the money when attention finally explodes? And who actually benefits from the league's sudden relevance? Because packed arenas did not automatically mean fair compensation. Players noticed the gap almost immediately. Revenue was rising, but salaries remained tightly constrained. That disconnect quietly fueled frustration across the league. Veterans had seen this pattern before, just on a smaller scale. Rookies expected opportunity, but found uncertainty instead. Caitlin Clark became the symbol of that contradiction. She represented growth the system was not ready to share, and the pressure began building behind closed doors. That pressure soon reached the WNBA Players Union. Negotiations for a new collective bargaining agreement approached quickly. Both sides publicly insisted progress was being made. Privately, trust between the league and players was deteriorating. The core issue was control, not just money. Players wanted revenue to reflect the league's new reality. The league wanted stability, predictability, and centralized authority. Those goals collided as the deadline approached. Behind the scenes, negotiations slowed instead of accelerating. Key issues were delayed, deferred, or quietly avoided. Then the deadline arrived, and everything broke down. No new agreement was reached. No clear explanation was offered to the players. Instead, the league entered what it called a status quo period. The phrase sounded harmless, almost reassuring, but its consequences were anything but calm. A free agency moratorium was immediately put in place. Players were suddenly barred from negotiating new contracts. Movement across the league came to a complete halt. Control shifted overnight, and players felt it instantly. Many described the decision as a unilateral power grab. The union demanded clarity, transparency, and a timeline. What they received instead was silence. That silence quickly turned into anger, because players believed the league was buying time to protect its leverage, and time to limit how much power players could gain. Caitlin Clark's presence magnified every part of this conflict. Her popularity made delays impossible to hide. Every frozen negotiation felt louder than before. Fans began asking questions the league could not easily answer. Why was free agency frozen during the league's biggest moment? Why were players asked to wait while revenue surged? And who truly controlled the future of the WNBA? Inside the union, confidence began turning into resolve. Players started viewing the situation as a test of power, not just a negotiation over numbers. Because if control wasn't challenged now, it never would be. The league insisted it was protecting long-term stability. Players heard something very different. They heard fear of losing authority, and fear of what the Caitlin Clark effect truly meant. Because stars like her changed bargaining dynamics permanently. One player could now shift league-wide economics. That reality unsettled an organization built on centralized control. As weeks passed, frustration continued to grow. Uncertainty spread across locker rooms and front offices alike. Rookies worried about stalled careers. Veterans worried about lost income and lost leverage. And fans sensed something was deeply wrong. The league had never faced pressure like this before. Because it wasn't coming from outside critics, it was coming from within. The Caitlin Clark era didn't just bring attention. It forced a confrontation over power and control. And that confrontation was far from over. Because the next phase would be even more disruptive. Talk of escalation quietly began circulating, including threats neither side wanted to make public. The possibility of prolonged standoffs entered the conversation. And for the first time, uncertainty reached the season itself. What was once a celebration had turned into a warning. The league's biggest star exposed its biggest vulnerability. Caitlin Clark didn't create this crisis. She simply made it impossible to ignore anymore. Once the spotlight turned harsh, the league's messaging began to fracture. Public statements stayed calm, but internal tension kept escalating. League officials spoke about patience, process, and long-term planning. Players heard delay, deflection, and deliberate stalling. The union argued the timing was no coincidence. Momentum favored players more than ever before. Crowds were larger, ratings were higher, and interest was undeniable. Yet revenue-sharing structures stayed largely unchanged. That contradiction became impossible to defend. Behind closed doors, players compared numbers and projections. They saw growth accelerating faster than compensation models allowed. For the union, this wasn't about greed. It was about aligning pay with the league's true value. And Caitlin Clark symbolized that value better than anyone else. Her games drew attention the league had chased for decades. Sponsors adjusted strategies around her presence. Media coverage followed her every move. But the system still treated players as if little had changed. That disconnect hardened positions on both sides. The league feared setting precedents it could not reverse. Players feared missing the moment that might never return. As talks stalled, union leadership prepared for escalation. Internal meetings grew more urgent and more strategic. Options once considered extreme were quietly discussed, including prolonged standoffs and coordinated pressure campaigns. The goal was leverage, not chaos. But leverage always carries risk. Fans began noticing the growing strain. Speculation spread across social media and sports talk shows. Was the league heading toward a major disruption? Would the season itself become collateral damage? The league tried to reassure sponsors and partners. Executives emphasized continuity and calm. But calm was not what players felt. They felt urgency slipping away with each passing week. Every frozen contract represented lost negotiating power. Every delay shifted momentum back toward management. The union accused the league of weaponizing the calendar. The league denied any intentional manipulation. Trust continued eroding in real time. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark's influence only kept expanding. Every road game felt like a headline event. Every broadcast reinforced her central role. She had become the league's most visible asset, and visibility changed bargaining dynamics forever. The league could no longer claim limited exposure. Players could now point to undeniable proof of growth. That proof strengthened the union's resolve, but it also raised the stakes dramatically. If no agreement emerged, consequences would ripple outward. Sponsors might hesitate, fans might lose patience, and the league's momentum could stall. The union believed the risk was worth taking, because moments like this rarely come twice. The league believed caution was still the safer path, because rapid change could destabilize fragile systems. That fundamental disagreement defined the standoff. Neither side wanted to blink first, and both sides understood what was truly at stake: control over the league's future direction. Caitlin Clark had accelerated history. Now the league was struggling to keep up. As pressure mounted, patience grew thinner, and the final outcome remained dangerously uncertain, because the next decision could define the entire era. For players, for the league, and for everyone watching what happens next. As the standoff dragged on, the consequences became harder to ignore. What began as negotiation had evolved into a test of endurance. Players wondered how long the league could maintain the freeze. The league wondered how far the union was willing to push back. Every side prepared contingency plans they hoped never to use, because escalation carried consequences beyond any single season. Broadcast partners watched developments with growing concern. Sponsors quietly evaluated their long-term commitments, and fans questioned whether momentum was being wasted. The league's biggest opportunity suddenly felt fragile. Caitlin Clark's rise had delivered unprecedented attention, but attention alone could not guarantee stability. Without agreement, growth risked turning into backlash. That possibility weighed heavily on both sides. Union leaders emphasized unity and long-term vision. They urged players to remain patient despite mounting pressure. The league emphasized responsibility and measured progress. It warned against decisions that could destabilize operations. Both narratives sounded reasonable in isolation. Together, they revealed a widening gap in priorities. The longer talks stalled, the harder compromise became. Positions hardened, and flexibility diminished. History offered few examples of clean resolutions under such strain. More often, progress arrived only after significant disruption. That reality hovered uncomfortably over every discussion. Players prepared themselves for difficult choices. The league prepared itself for reputational risk. Neither side wanted to be blamed for derailing momentum. Yet momentum was already slowing. Caitlin Clark's presence continued drawing attention regardless. But attention without resolution only amplified scrutiny. Every unanswered question became a headline. Every delay became evidence of deeper dysfunction. The league could no longer manage perception alone. Fans demanded clarity, not carefully worded statements. They wanted to know who was truly in control, and whether this moment would be seized or squandered. Inside the union, resolve solidified. This was seen as a once-in-a-generation opportunity, an opportunity created by years of struggle and sudden stardom. The league viewed the same moment with caution. Rapid change carried risks it was not ready to embrace. That difference in perspective defined the crisis, because crises are rarely about a single decision. They are about timing, leverage, and trust. And trust had eroded faster than anyone expected. Caitlin Clark did not choose this role, but her success made confrontation unavoidable. The league's future now revolved around how it responded, whether it adapted to new realities, or resisted until change was forced upon it. Because moments like this define eras. They reveal who holds power when circumstances shift, and who is willing to share it. The Caitlin Clark effect was never just about basketball. It was about influence, leverage, and long-delayed change. Now, the league stood at a crossroads. One path led toward adaptation and shared growth. The other led toward prolonged conflict and uncertainty. Which path would be chosen remained unclear, but the consequences would be impossible to ignore. For players seeking fairness, for the league seeking control, and for fans watching history unfold in real time, the resolution will define the next decade of the WNBA. Whether that future is stable or volatile, empowering or restrictive, the answer has not arrived yet. But one thing is already clear. The league cannot return to what it was before. Caitlin Clark changed the equation permanently, and the consequences are only just beginning.